はい。皆さん、こんにちは。米国特許セミナーExaminIrksを始めたいと思います。いつも各週火曜日のランチタイムにお届けしています。講師は特許弁護士であるブライアン・エプスタインさんです。はい。第8回目の今回は限定要求の実務についてです。先日、ブライアンさんが限定要求に関する非常に興味深いブログ記事を書かれていました。そこで今回は限定要求にうまく対処する方法について解説いただきたいと思います。それではお話しいただきたいと思います。Okay, Brian さん。The model blog recently discussed restriction practice. How can applicants keep their examiners happy when responding to restriction requirements?
Yeah, that's a great idea to discuss. So here's our disclaimer. To answer your question, let's consider how to respond to a restriction, both in terms of electing and traversing, as well as in considering rejoinder of withdrawn claims. So we begin by trying to understand what a restriction is. And some examiners might complain that sometimes applicants do not understand the basis or the structure of a restriction. So let's take a step back and think about how examiners make restrictions and elections. So an examiner has a lot of discretion in terms of how they do it. Originally, and by originally I mean 60 years ago, restrictions were based on embodiments in the specification. So, for example, the specification might say, first embodiment, second embodiment, and the examiner would tell you the applicant to select or to restrict prosecution to one of the disclosed embodiments. Certainly there are other possibilities. It doesn't have to say, first embodiment or second embodiment. It could say, like circuit board and then computer, something like that, where it describes a combination and a subcombination. Elections, on the other hand, are based on differences in the figures. So, for example, maybe the application pertains to some sort of optics, and figure 1 shows one type of lens and figure 2 shows a different type of lens, and the examiner will tell you to elect one of the two figures for prosecution on the merits. They're in many ways different. Well, not in many ways different. They're different in the sense of what forms the basis for the restriction or election. They are similar in that they're both trying to reduce the total amount of subject matter being presented for prosecution. Typically, that relates to the claims as well. So an examiner can request both a restriction and an election. And as we'll discuss on the next slide, they can also have multi-tiered restrictions. So how do we respond to a restriction? So the first thing, of course, is to follow the examiner's instructions for your restriction. So in particular, this might require some sort of selection of a group. For example, if your specification discloses 3 different embodiments, each one might correspond to a different group. Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. So we select one of those, and then your examiner could have a subsequent restriction, such as of a subgroup. And in this case, the examiner's restriction requirement will make a statement like, if you select group 1, then you also should select a subgroup of A, B, or C. In this situation, you have to do both. You can't just say group one. You also have to then select a subgroup of A, B, or C. Most of the time, the examiners will tell you which claims they think these are. Sometimes they don't, but certainly the examiner might get it wrong, and then you can just tell the examiner like, look, I selected group one. I chose subgroup A, but I don't agree with the claim mapping, and here's why. That is a form of traverse. Another way to traverse is to address the examiner's grounds for making the restriction or the election. In particular, we can do that if the examiner's evidence is weak. The examiner is doing the best job they can based on the information that is in your application. So, for example, if your description of drawings says, figure one shows an apparatus and figure two shows a different apparatus, the examiner has grounds for saying, look, I'm going to require an election between figure one, directed to an apparatus, and figure two, directed to a different apparatus. I don't know why the application might make this kind of statement, but it's common, right? Maybe the person that drafted the application wasn't thinking, maybe the figures got moved around and the description of the drawing section just wasn't updated. Maybe there was an issue in translation. Whatever it is, you know, it should be pretty easy to present arguments to your examiner and say, look, applicant recognizes that that the specification states that figure two shows a different apparatus. However, it's maybe it's a translation error and it's just supposed to say it shows a different view of the apparatus or something along those lines. And when your examiner receives this kind of traverse, I think in most cases they're willing to reconsider um, the restriction because they realize that hey, maybe the restriction or election wasn't proper in these circumstances.
はい、ここまで、限定要求と選択要求の違いや、限定要求を受けた時の対処法について解説いただきました。次に、限定要求とはセットになることが多い分割出願ですね。と、その後のクレームの再結合について聞いてみたいと思います。Okay, so Brian-san, it sounds like responding to restrictions can be complicated. Restrictions sometimes lead applicants to file divisional applications. A divisional application requires many of the costs of a second prosecution. So to save cost, applicants instead might add new dependent claims to the original application to cover a non-elected invention. These claims are eligible for rejoinder, right?
Yeah, they are. So what we're discussing here is rejoining claims under MPEP 821.04. So, an election is made. Some of the claims might be canceled and re-added as dependent claims that have similar or the same subject matter. They will be withdrawn. Maybe they're already in the chain of claims, and that is the point of the election, is to just withdraw some of these claims. And basically what happens is that the examiner will not consider the subject matter of those claims. However, if they depend from an allowable claim, when the application moves to allowance, the examiner will just do a quick check to make sure that these claims comply with statutory bases like, indefiniteness, and then they will be allowed based on their dependence from the allowed independent claim. However, their subject matter will not be substantively examined. Wow. Okay. So examiners might complain that sometimes after withdrawing a non-elected invention, right, there was an election, we're choosing group one, group two is getting withdrawn. Applicants add new claims to the non-elected invention, where the new claims depend from an elected independent claim. So if claim one is directed to group one, and we withdraw, and we do not select group two, those claims become withdrawn. Typically, applicants will cancel them. Applicants might then rewrite that same subject matter as dependent claims to depend from claim one. That's kind of the situation we're talking about here. It's a way to get the subject matter of those of embodiment two, of group two, maybe allowed in the same application, maybe to reduce cost. In some situations, in many situations, this practice is fine. This is a very common thing. It is frequently considered by applicants. However, sometimes the inventions are mutually exclusive or have other issues, have other relationships that prevent applicants from making this move. So, for example, an invention might have a lens from figure one or a lens from figure two, but not both. In this example, maybe the election is between the lens of figure one and the lens of figure two. We elect figure one. We withdraw the subject matter from figure two, right? These are maybe a different set of independent claims. We add them as new dependent claims depending from claim one. But there's going to be issues, okay? So for example, there might be issues with enablement. Maybe your specification or figures are not drafted such that a person of skill in the art could make or use a device having both lenses, right? Maybe you only disclose, maybe you don't have possession of a device with two lenses, right? Maybe we fail written description. Maybe we never describe that, hey, this apparatus could have two lenses. So we've got those kinds of concerns as statutory bases for issues relating to the combined subject matter of the two embodiments, right? Because our claims directed to the lens of figure two depend from an embodiment with the lens of figure one. In addition, we might have infringement concerns. A competitor might make a device that has only one of the lenses, right? And we thought we were trying to avoid filing a separate application to cover the subject matter of figure two. Of course, our allowed independent claim will still cover the one lens embodiment of figure one, but now we don't have meaningful protection for the lens of figure two. Maybe we don't enable or have description support for a device including both lenses. Maybe a competitor only puts lens two into their device, and we only have coverage for a device with both.
はい。So, adding dependent claims for the purposes of rejoinder can be beneficial. However, it should be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
はい、ブライアンさん、ありがとうございました。解説にあったように、再結合を目的とした従属クレームの追加は、有効な場合がありますが、ケースバイケースで検討すべきということでした。はい、今回はこれで以上になります。ご質問や使ってほしいトピックなどがありましたら、YouTube のコメント欄に書いていただくか、スライド最後に記載のメールアドレスまでお気軽にご連絡ください。では本日もありがとうございました。失礼します。
Thank you. Just to point out, in case people aren't familiar with the Moto blog, our inspiration for this session came from this link where we discussed petitions on restrictions recently. Thank you very much for attending. Please, let us know in the comments if you like it or like the stream or subscribe. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.